Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode where I share a tutorial on how to make games in LÖVE 2D. So we've been building a game using the asset pack from Ski Free, and last time we implemented a physics engine on our Yeti. So essentially we could manage the collision between the Yeti and the skiers. So if you remember, essentially when the skiers collide with the Yeti, they stop moving, and then the skiers get pushed around by the Yeti. So essentially last time what I said was we were going to do a part 2 to essentially enhance our collisions and kind of finish implementing our physics engine. But before I released that, I kind of realized that we had kind of a small bug in our game, and that was that essentially the Yeti can only move either in the X direction or in the Y direction. There's no like diagonal movement happening right now. So I want to fix that before I release this part 2. All right, so let me pull up the code. All right, perfect. It opened right where we needed to be. So we're inside of our love.update function. And inside of this function, essentially we have these calls to love.keyboard.isDown for the down, up, left, and right keys. And whenever we press one of those keys, it essentially recognizes that that key is down. And what it does, it looks at the Yeti body, which is the physics body that we've assigned to our Yeti, and it changes its velocity. So essentially it's going to change its velocity in either the X or Y direction, depending on which key you're pressing. So if you're pressing the down or up keys, it's going to change the Y velocity. If you're doing the left and right, it's going to change the right velocities. So our problem is that at any point in time, if you press 2 keys, it's setting one of the direction to 0, whether it's at the X or the Y, and then the other one, it's moving it in one direction. And it's a if else. So essentially it's kind of going down the order. So if you've pressed the down key and then you press the left key, essentially it's just getting locked in our first if statement. And so it's essentially just prioritizing the order of the code that we've written. So that's kind of a problem. So we've got 2 issues, right? We essentially need to allow for movement in both X and Y at the same time. And then we essentially need to remove our if-else logic gate. All right, so to do that, what we're going to do is essentially we're going to remove our linear velocity calls from our functions. I'm also going to clean up our old implementation here. There we go. And then we're going to remove this last else. All right. So what we're going to set, essentially our base animation for Yeti is going to be just idle. And then instead of having if else, we're just going to have a series of if statements. Boom, boom. And so now what's going on, right, is if you press the down key, you're setting the running animation. But if you press the down key and the left key at the same time, you're setting the Yeti animation to running, but you're also setting the left direction to true. So the next thing that we want to do, right, is we do want to move our Yeti. We want our Yeti to move around the board. So we're going to call Yeti body, and we're going to set the linear velocity outside of our if-else calls. And what we're going to do essentially is going to take a vector x and a vector y value. There we go. And so vector x and vector y, we're just going to initiate it to 0. So essentially when the Yeti is idle, our linear velocity is essentially 0 and 0. So we're just going to set these to 0 outside of our if statements. And so this is where it becomes, this is kind of like where the implementation happens. In each of the if statements, we're essentially going to modify either x or vec x and vec y or vec y, depending on which key you're pressing. So essentially, if you're pressing the down key, you're going to modify vec y, and you're moving downwards. So essentially, you're making the y value bigger. So we're going to move, we're going to modify by player movement positive. If you're pressing the up key, you're modifying it again the y direction, but you're making it smaller, so we're going to put a negative. And finally, well, not finally, but if you're moving it in the left direction, you're modifying the x, you're making that smaller, and then the right, last one, you're also moving the x, and you're making that bigger. And so now, essentially, right, if you don't press any keys, vec x and vec y are going to be equal to 0, and the Yeti animation is going to be idle. If you press just one key, you're going to modify either vec y or vec x, which is going to override the value of 0 to whatever player movement is. And then you're going to move in that direction. And you're also going to change the Yeti animation from idle Yeti to running Yeti. Now, if you press two keys, down and up, essentially your vector y's are going to cancel each other, so you're not going to move in any direction, but you're going to keep the running Yeti animation. And now if you click on the up, down, and left, or down and right, you're essentially going to have orthogonal vectors. And so you're going to move diagonally. So let's take a look at our implementation. Boop. So here's our Yeti. He's moving left and right. That's working. Up and down. And now if I press both up and left, there we go. We're moving diagonally. So one thing that you'll notice is when you're moving diagonally, you're actually moving faster than you're moving in a straight line. And that's essentially because when you have two orthogonal vectors, and you sum them up, you get a diagonal vector that's essentially larger. And essentially it's Pythagorean theorem. So you could solve it with, I believe, like the square root of 2. But we're not going to implement that right now. But yeah, so this is how we fixed our diagonal movement. So we still have our colliders. So let me actually draw them to the screen really quick. And then what we'll do is in our next video, we will implement our collision detection pieces. So instead of just having the Yeti move around and knock the skiers all over the place, we will essentially implement the Yeti taking a specific action, in this case eating the skier, when the collision happens. But yeah, thank you so much for tuning in, and stay tuned for additional developments for this game. I think it's coming along really nicely, and every week we're making some progress to make it a more and more polished game. So I've been very excited. And if you like what you're seeing, feel free to subscribe and follow along for more cool tutorial videos on Love 2D. Thank you so much. It's like that.